Leland Watkins had never been one for fancy restaurants. He preferred the comfort of a well-worn booth at the corner diner in Stamford, where the waitress knew how he liked his eggs and never forgot to refill his coffee. But this night was different. He had driven nearly 2 hours through Manhattan traffic to sit at an oakwood table covered in starched white linen, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and the low murmur of old money. He adjusted the cuffs of his button-down shirt, the fabric soft and slightly faded, his khakis neatly pressed but unmistakably modest. Around him, the evening crowd glimmered in designer fabrics, gold watches catching candlelight, and smiles that rarely reached the eyes. Across the table sat his daughter Loretta, glowing in a fitted designer dress he didn't recognize. Her hair was styled into sleek waves, her fingers adorned with a diamond ring the size of a hazelnut. Beside her lounged Victor Harrove, the man she would marry in 3 weeks' time. His suit was so sharply tailored it looked like it could slice through paper, and the way he held his wine glass, effortlessly confident, reminded Leland of every slick salesman he had ever mistrusted. Victor leaned back, one arm resting along the back of Loretta's chair. "Frankly, old man," he said, not bothering to lower his voice, "beggars like you have no place at our wedding." The words landed with a cruel finality. Conversation at nearby tables fell silent. Leland's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass, the condensation making it slippery in his grip. He didn't look away from Victor, nor from the smug smirk curling at the corner of his mouth. Loretta shifted in her seat, but didn't speak. He turned to her. "Loretta?" She avoided his gaze. "Maybe Victor has a point," she said softly, her voice so different from the one that used to sing off key in the back seat of his old truck. "It's going to be a very refined event. The guest list is exclusive." Leland's throat tightened. He thought of all the nights he'd worked double shifts after Mary died, making sure Loretta had new shoes, school supplies, warm coats. The birthday parties he'd planned alone, the math homework sessions that turned into bedtime stories. He had given her everything he could, piece by piece, year by year. And now, she couldn't even meet his eyes. Victor waved dismissively at Leland's clothes. "It's nothing personal, it's just business. You'd stand out, not in a good way." A waiter approached, hesitant. Victor didn't miss a beat. "Another bottle of Dom Riol, please." He said it like a punchline, then smirked again, clearly enjoying himself. The waiter nodded quickly and disappeared, leaving behind a silence that pressed down like humidity. Leland took a breath, long and deep. "I see." That was all he said. He folded his napkin, smoothing it slowly before placing it beside his untouched glass of wine. Then he stood. His legs felt heavy, like they didn't want to carry him out of this moment. But he moved anyway, quietly and deliberately, walking between tables where strangers tried not to stare too obviously. As he reached the door, he heard Victor's voice again. "See how easy that was? Sometimes you just have to be direct with people like that." The doorman opened the glass door without a word, his face a blank mask of professionalism. Outside, the spring air was cool against Leland's cheeks, but it did nothing to calm the burning inside his chest. He walked toward his truck, parked between a line of luxury sedans, its faded paint and creaky suspension marking it as an outsider in this world. He sat in the cab for several minutes, staring through the windshield. Inside the restaurant, he could still see Loretta and Victor, laughing now. Relieved, like they had solved a minor inconvenience. A flicker of memory surfaced, Loretta at 8 years old, defending their old beat-up station wagon when classmates mocked it. "It's not about what we drive," she had said, standing proudly at his side. "It's about who we are." What had changed? He started the truck. The engine grumbled to life, loyal as always. As he merged into the stream of Manhattan traffic, bright lights danced across his windshield, glimpses of opulence, success, a city that rewarded the loudest, the flashiest. He didn't belong here, he never had, but tonight, that feeling stung more than usual. He drove north on I-95, the signs for Westchester and Connecticut flashing by. Usually this drive brought peace. It meant home. But now, each passing mile felt heavier, like he was leaving behind more than a restaurant. At a rest stop near White Plains, he pulled over. Under harsh fluorescent lights, he sat alone in the cab and pulled out his wallet. From behind old receipts and folded bills, he slid out a photograph, creased, well-loved. Mary and Loretta, arms wrapped around each other, graduation caps on their heads. Loretta's smile was wide and proud. Leland's heart twisted. Where had that little girl gone? And why had he let her forget? He closed his eyes, holding the photo for a long time. Then quietly, he whispered into the empty cab, "Maybe it's time I remind her." Leland Watkins sat in his quiet kitchen, long after midnight, the overhead light casting a warm glow across the worn linoleum floor. A third cup of coffee steamed in front of him, untouched. The silence felt louder than any city street, filled with echoes of words he couldn't forget. "Beggars like you have no place at our wedding." The words looped through his mind, each time sharper, heavier. But worse than Victor's insult was Loretta's silence. Her soft agreement had landed like a final nail. Leland had spent 30 years building a life around fatherhood, and in one dinner, that life had been dismissed like a worn coat left at the door. He stood slowly, joints creaking in protest, and moved to the mantel above the fireplace. Photographs lined the shelf, birthdays, school plays, Christmas mornings, Mary's smiling face in almost every one. Loretta's first steps, her college graduation, so many frozen moments, all pointing toward a love that felt increasingly one-sided. In the basement, the air was cooler, dustier. He flicked on the light and walked past the shelves of tools and half-finished woodwork projects. Near the far wall, under a faded canvas tarp, sat the safe. He knelt, fingers finding the dial by instinct. Mary's birthday, then Loretta's. The click of the lock felt like opening a door to a different life. Inside, file folders rested in tidy rows, decades of decisions made in quiet determination. He pulled out the first one, Apple Inc. He remembered the day in 1995 when he'd emptied his savings, $50,000, into what colleagues called a doomed company. "You could have bought a decent car," his old boss had scoffed. But Leland wasn't looking for comfort. He was looking for legacy. He turned the page. Tesla. Another $50,000, placed in 2003, when electric cars were a punchline. His friends had called it foolish, but Mary had said, "Sometimes faith looks like madness until it works." And it had worked. He walked back upstairs, papers in hand, and opened his laptop. Numbers glowed on the screen. Stock prices, portfolio summaries. After years of splits, dividends, reinvestments, the total stared back at him. $17 million. Leland leaned back, heart beating steady, not from shock, but from clarity. They had called him a beggar. He opened another folder, one that hurt to see. A trust fund. $10 million, drafted as a wedding gift for Loretta. Structured to support her for life, encourage charitable giving, promote education, values he had spent his whole life believing in. He had planned to unveil it during his wedding toast. But now? He stood, walked to the phone, and dialed a number he hadn't called in a while. "James Thompson," came the voice on the other end. "Leland, everything all right?" "I need to revise my will," Leland said. His voice was calm, steady. "The trust for Loretta. It's no longer appropriate." There was a pause. "That's a significant change. May I ask why?" "Circumstances have changed," Leland replied. "Let's just say, she made her priorities clear." As James took notes and confirmed details, Leland looked out the window. The moonlight bathed the backyard in silver. The grass needed mowing. The porch light flickered slightly. Nothing about the house screamed wealth. But wealth had lived here all along, in sacrifice, in love, in the silent spaces where fathers do what needs to be done. When the call ended, Leland walked back to the safe and carefully returned each document. He spun the lock until it clicked shut, sealing not just the paper, but a chapter of his life. Back in the kitchen, the coffee was cold. He reheated it anyway. On the table lay a calendar. He reached for a pen and drew a circle around a single square. June 15th. He didn't feel rage, not anymore. What had taken its place was quieter, more focused. If Victor and Loretta wanted to live in a world measured by appearances, they were about to learn what real value looked like. Not through anger, not through revenge, but through clarity. They had dismissed the man. Now they would meet the legacy. The first thing Leland Watkins did the next morning was iron his shirt. Not because he planned to wear it that day, but because it reminded him of order, of control, of doing something with your own hands that created visible change. The quiet hiss of the steam, the rhythm of back and forth across the fabric, it calmed his thoughts, like the rituals he used to practice before big engineering presentations years ago. Then he picked up the phone and called Emily Reed. He hadn't spoken to her in months, one of Loretta's old high school teachers, now a colleague and friend. She had always been warm and easy to talk to, never judging Leland for his humble home or his off-brand coffee mugs. They met that Saturday at a small cafe in downtown Stamford. Leland sat outside with a newspaper and a plain cup of black coffee, dressed in his usual khakis and a jacket that had seen more winters than he could count. He looked up just as Emily arrived, cheerful as ever, her teacher's bag over one shoulder. "Mr. Watkins, what a surprise!" "Emily, good morning," he said, standing to greet her. "Please, sit." She settled into the chair across from him. "Planning wedding surprises?" she teased, grinning. "Something like that," Leland smiled. "I hear June 15th is going to be quite a day." "Oh, it's going to be beautiful," she said. Victor picked the venue, this grand estate in Greenwich. Classic architecture, marble columns, valet parking. "I've never seen anything like it." Leland nodded thoughtfully. "How many guests?" "About 200, she said, stirring sugar into her iced tea. "Victor's business associates, a few family friends. Loretta's been pretty stressed about making everything perfect. He's very particular." She didn't know it, but she was giving him a full reconnaissance report. "What time's the ceremony?" 4 o'clock, she answered. "Cocktail hour in the garden, dinner around 7, dancing after that." "Oh, and security's tight." Victor insisted on it, said image matters. Leland smiled gently. "Of course, image." They talked for 20 more minutes. By the time Emily left, she had no idea she'd just helped build the blueprint for one of the most poetic reversals Greenwich had ever seen. That afternoon, Leland took a taxi into the city. The showroom on 57th Street gleamed like a temple of wealth, marble floors, crystal lighting, and a fleet of cars that cost more than most people's homes. He stepped inside, holding a leather portfolio under one arm. The salespeople barely looked up. A young man eventually approached. His smile was thin, practiced. "Sir, can I help you?" "I'd like to purchase a Rolls-Royce Phantom," Leland said. The salesman blinked. Then he laughed. "Sir, those start at $500,000. Perhaps I can show you something more within reach." Leland said nothing. He opened the portfolio, withdrew a certified check, and placed it on the glass countertop. The room changed. Within minutes, managers appeared. Apologies were made. Suddenly, Leland was royalty. Every feature was explained in hushed tones, every option offered with reverence. He chose quickly. Midnight blue exterior, cream leather interior, custom stitching, every package. "We offer premium chauffeur services," the manager said cautiously, still in awe. "I'll need your best," Leland replied. "For June 15th, discretion required." They brought out Marcus Thompson, former military, polished, professional. The handshake was firm, the eyes clear. "It would be an honor," Marcus said. "Where shall I pick you up?" "Stamford, 2:30 sharp." "Understood, sir." Leland left the showroom with a delivery schedule, contact numbers, and the first spark of satisfaction he had felt in weeks. Not because of the car, but because of what it represented: readiness. The next stop was Madison Avenue, Brooks Brothers. He walked in dressed plainly. Again, he was underestimated. Again, the moment he revealed his intention. "I need a full transformation. Tailored. Suit, accessories, shoes, the works." Everything shifted. They measured, they recommended, they educated him on fabric weights and cuts, on lapel shapes and cuff styles. He selected a deep charcoal wool suit that fit like it was sculpted to his shoulders. The shirt? Egyptian cotton. The shoes? Italian leather, handmade. And the final touch, a Rolex date just, its gold and steel bracelet gleaming in the soft lighting of the showroom. When he saw his reflection in the fitting room mirror, Leland barely recognized himself. He didn't look rich. He looked right. As he left the store, the consultant promised, "Final fitting by June 13th. You'll be ready for anything." Leland stepped back onto the sidewalk, the city buzzing around him. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. He looked up, took in the weight of the skyline, and allowed himself a rare, quiet smile. They had made their judgments. On June 15th, they would see, not just a father, not just a man, but the truth, walking tall in Italian leather. June 15th arrived clear and bright, the morning sun slipping through the blinds of Leland Watkins' modest bedroom like a quiet promise. He woke before his alarm, well-rested and calm. The house was still, save for the soft gurgle of the coffee maker and the whisper of birdsong outside. He dressed with precision, each movement deliberate. The Brooks Brothers suit, charcoal gray with a classic cut, fit like it had been poured onto him. The Egyptian cotton shirt, crisp and white, caught the light as he buttoned the cuffs. The Rolex slid onto his wrist with a quiet, confident weight. Italian leather shoes, polished to a shine, completed the look. He paused in front of the mirror. This was not a disguise. This was a reflection of everything they had failed to see. On the nightstand, Mary smiled back at him from a framed photo. Her eyes were soft, knowing. He placed one hand gently on the frame. "Wish me luck." At exactly 2:30, the unmistakable rumble of the Rolls-Royce Phantom echoed down his quiet street. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains as Marcus stepped from the driver's side in a crisp black uniform and opened the door with a bow. "Good afternoon, Mr. Watkins. You look impeccable." "Thank you, Marcus," Leland replied, stepping into the cream leather interior. The door closed with a satisfying thunk, sealing him into a different world. The drive to Greenwich passed in silence. Trees lined the road like sentinels. The countryside rolled past, calm and steady, mirroring Leland's breath. In the passenger seat beside him lay a small leather case. Inside it, a few folded pages, and the wedding invitation that had never arrived. At 4 o'clock sharp, the grand estate rose into view, its Georgian columns standing like monuments to excess. The lawn stretched wide, perfectly manicured, dotted with marble fountains and elegantly dressed guests sipping champagne under parasols. Marcus guided the Phantom down the long circular drive. Other luxury vehicles lined the valet drop-off. Bentleys, Maseratis, a vintage Aston Martin gleaming in the sun. But none drew the attention that followed the Phantom's approach. As Marcus stepped out and rounded the car, guests turned, heads swiveled, conversations faltered. The valet straightened his jacket nervously as Marcus opened the passenger door. Leland stepped out. The afternoon sun caught the glint of his watch, the clean lines of his suit, the quiet confidence in his posture. His steps were even, his eyes steady, his expression unreadable. Gasps spread like ripples. "Is that? Wait, is that Loretta's father? I thought he was—" Victor and Loretta stood near the garden archway, mid-conversation with a couple from Philadelphia. Loretta's champagne glass halted mid-air. Victor's gaze followed hers. Their faces shifted in perfect sync, confusion, recognition, alarm. Victor recovered first. He strode forward, hand outstretched. "Mr. Watkins, what a surprise. We, must have had a mix-up with the invitation." Leland smiled politely and accepted a flute from a passing waiter. How considerate of you to remember me now." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. All around them, the atmosphere had shifted. Guests leaned closer, their curiosity growing. Victor's posture stiffened, but his smile remained fixed, just slightly too wide. Loretta approached slowly, her steps hesitant. "Daddy," she said softly, "you look different." "I dress for the occasion," he said, calmly sipping the champagne. "This seems like a very important one." Victor cleared his throat. "Would you like to be seated? Ceremony's starting soon." Leland glanced at his Rolex. "Yes, I believe I'm right on time." The usher, clearly unsure of where to place him, fumbled with the seating chart. Leland put a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder. "It's all right. I'll stand in the back." He didn't need a front row seat. He was the front page now. As the ceremony began, Leland stood beneath the shade of an old oak tree, watching Loretta walk down the aisle on Victor's arm. Her smile trembled. Victor's jaw was tight. Around them, the guests cast sideways glances, whispers now unavoidable. The vows passed in a blur of flowers and music. Applause followed. Champagne glasses refilled. The celebration spilled out onto the lawn, and then into the ballroom, where chandeliers cast golden light over linen-covered tables. And through it all, the question buzzed just below the surface. Who was this man? Why had no one known? Why had they been told he didn't belong? As dessert plates were cleared and the string quartet played the soft intro to a waltz, the wedding coordinator stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, smiling, "before we begin dancing, we have a special toast from the bride's father, Mr. Leland Watkins." All conversation ceased. Victor flinched. Loretta looked down. Leland placed his glass on the table and stood, every movement unhurried. Every eye followed him as he stepped toward the microphone. He adjusted it slightly. Then he looked out over the room of 200 people who had once been told he wasn't good enough to be here, and he began to speak. Leland Watkins stood at the microphone in the center of the grand ballroom, his figure cast in soft light beneath the chandelier's golden glow. Around him, 200 elegantly dressed guests sat in silence, the usual clinking of glasses and low conversation gone. All eyes were on the man who, only moments ago, had been presumed a stranger, perhaps even a mistake. He took a slow breath. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm, clear, and steady. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate Loretta and Victor's wedding." Polite nods, a few murmurs of approval. Some guests smiled out of habit, but most leaned forward just slightly, sensing there was more. "This is a magnificent venue," Leland continued, scanning the room. "The flowers, the music, the champagne, it's all exceptional. And I see that no expense has been spared. That's a reflection of care, planning, and resources." A few guests chuckled politely. "But if you'll allow me," he said, voice dropping just a note, "I'd like to tell you a story. Not about weddings, about worth." Victor shifted in his seat. Loretta's eyes dropped to her lap. "A few weeks ago," Leland went on, "I sat in a Manhattan restaurant with my daughter and her fiancé. I had driven into the city just to be part of their joy, but instead I was told I didn't belong, that I was, and I quote, a beggar, that my presence would ruin the atmosphere of a refined celebration." Gasps rippled through the crowd, necklines stiffened, brows furrowed, cell phones were quietly raised under napkins. Victor began to rise from his seat. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. Leland didn't flinch. He reached calmly into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "What those people didn't know," he said, holding the document up for the room to see, "was what this paper represents, and what I represent." He unfolded it slowly, the soft rustle echoing across the hushed room. "This is a certified statement from my investment portfolio," he continued. "It documents my holdings across Apple, Tesla, and a number of other companies. It's been accumulated quietly over decades, and as of this morning, its total value stands at $17 million. The silence shattered. Gasps, murmurs, heads whipping from side to side. 17 million. "I am not a beggar," Leland said, each word as firm as stone. "I am, and always have been, a a man who believed in living simply, in building quietly, and in raising my daughter with love, values, and the belief that kindness mattered more than image. Loretta's face was pale. Her champagne glass trembled in her hand. Victor looked as though he'd swallowed glass. "But the truth hurts," Leland said, turning slightly toward them, "because the man you dismissed owns more wealth than anyone else in this room. Not that it matters, not really, but it does raise the question, who here actually belongs?" The crowd was fully engaged now, the lines between celebration and revelation completely erased. "And it pains me to say this," he said, pulling out a second document. "This was a trust, $10 million, created as a gift for my daughter, structured to support her through life, to reward education and giving. It was meant to be my surprise at this very dinner." He paused, watching Loretta's shoulders drop. "But that trust has been revoked. The funds have been redirected to educational charities across the country, to help children like Loretta once was. Kids with secondhand clothes and big dreams. Kids who know the value of love, not just the appearance of success." Victor stood up abruptly. "You can't just come in here and—" Leland looked at him, and Victor froze. Not because of a threat, but because there was no fear in Leland's eyes. Just truth. "I have no interest in ruining anyone's evening," Leland said quietly. "But I do believe in telling the truth, and in teaching lessons where they're needed." He set the documents gently on the table beside the microphone. "Money," he said, "can buy tables like these, and flowers like these, but it can't buy character. That's something you have to earn." Then he looked at Loretta. "I loved you every single day of your life. I still do. But today, I choose to love you from a distance. Because dignity, once abandoned, has a cost." Loretta opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hands gripped the tablecloth, knuckles white. Leland gave a small nod. "I believe I've said enough." He turned, stepping off the platform. The guests parted silently as he walked through them. The only sound, the soft echo of leather soles on polished marble. Behind him, the ballroom buzzed with 1,000 questions. Some aimed at Victor, some at Loretta, but none at him. Because in that moment, everyone already had their answer. The sun was low on the horizon when the Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled away from the estate. Leland Watkins sat in the back seat, the soft hum of the engine beneath him, the weight of the day still lingering in the quiet space around him. The window beside him framed the last image of the estate, Loretta standing alone on the marble steps, her wedding gown catching the final light like silk in the wind. Mascara streaked her cheeks. Her hands trembled at her sides. But Leland didn't look away. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply watched until the figure faded from view, swallowed by distance and dusk. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror but said nothing. His professionalism extended even to moments like this. The silence was not awkward. It was sacred. "Back to Stamford, sir?" he finally asked. Leland nodded. "Yes, let's go home." Home. The word settled deep inside his chest like an anchor, grounding him. The modest house in Connecticut, the chipped mug waiting on the kitchen counter, the scent of pine wood in the hallway, none of it had changed. But he had. The man who returned that night was not the same man who had left. Back in his living room, Leland loosened his tie and set the Rolex on the mantel. He poured himself a small glass of bourbon and stood by the window, watching the stars rise over the familiar trees beyond his fence. No calls came, no texts. The phone lay silent on the counter, as if unsure whether to break the peace or respect it. He didn't expect an apology. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Some choices echo for years before the people who made them can hear their own voices in the distance. He sat down at the kitchen table where Mary's photo still smiled up at him. He lifted the glass in her direction. "To quiet decisions," he said softly, "and to every sacrifice we never asked to be thanked for." The next morning came as mornings always do, with light through the blinds and the smell of coffee. Leland made breakfast, not out of hunger but out of habit. 2 eggs, buttered toast, black coffee in the chipped mug. He took the newspaper from the front step and paused at the sight of it. The society section, front page. Father's fortune changes everything at Greenwich wedding. Below it, a photo captured the moment he stood at the microphone, documents in hand. His expression, unreadable. Her face, Loretta's, frozen in shock. He folded the paper, unread. He already knew what it said. Later that afternoon, Emily stopped by. She didn't ask questions. She didn't mention the headlines. She simply handed him a pie wrapped in foil and said, "Thought you might need something sweet." They sat on the porch in companionable silence, the spring breeze tugging gently at the wind chimes. Finally, she asked, "Do you think she'll ever come around?" Leland stared out at the sky for a long moment. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I do know this. What I gave her yesterday wasn't punishment. It was a lesson. What she does with it is hers to decide." Emily nodded. He didn't say anything else, and neither did she. Some days didn't need more than a slice of pie and an honest answer. That night, as the stars returned to their rightful place in the sky, Leland sat with a pen and a fresh sheet of paper. He wrote slowly, carefully, deliberately. "Loretta, this is not a letter of anger. I told you the truth, not to hurt you, but because I had been hurt, and because silence, in moments like that, can make good men disappear. You said once long ago that I was the smartest dad in the world. I never needed that to be true. I only wanted to be good enough. But when money became your measuring stick, I suddenly did not measure up. I hope one day when the noise fades and the pride settles, you'll understand why I did what I did. Not for revenge, but for you to see me again, clearly, without the fog of ambition or shame. You were never raised to choose status over love, but you're still my daughter. That hasn't changed. I just need to be the kind of father now who loves from the right distance. Be well, be kind, and if you ever need to remember who you really are, you know where home is. Dad." He folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it on the mantel beside Mary's photo. He would send it. Not today, but soon. Outside, the wind rustled the trees in the dark. Inside, Leland Watkins sat in the stillness of a small house, no longer mistaken for less than he was. Because now everyone knew. And in a world obsessed with wealth, dignity had finally gotten its microphone. Sometimes the most powerful moments in life happen not in noise, but in silence. When someone chooses dignity over revenge, truth over approval, and walks away without needing applause. That is exactly what Leland Watkins did. He did not slam the door or demand anyone understand. He simply stood up for what was right and let the truth speak for itself. It was not about the car, not about the money. It was about a father who had spent his life giving quietly and who finally had to remind the world, especially his own daughter, what true worth looks like. That reminder came not in anger, but in clarity, in a calm voice, in a final letter, not of rage, but of resolve. This story is not just about wealth or weddings. It's about something much older, something many of us learned on front porches from parents who had little but gave much. You do not measure a person by their clothes, their car, or how they talk at dinner parties. You measure them by how they treat people who can offer them nothing in return. There is a lesson here for all of us. When someone shows up with humble clothes but a full heart, do not mistake them for being less. Because someday, that very person might be holding not just a fortune, but the truth you need to hear. Leland's quiet stand reminded us that we are not defined by how others treat us, but by how we respond when they do. The deeper truth? Dignity does not shout. It does not argue or prove. It simply is. And when it finally rises, whether in a quiet man with $17 million or a woman sitting alone with nothing but regret, justice becomes undeniable. Just like a lighthouse that stands through storms, unwavering and bright, one simple act of self-respect can guide others home through even the darkest choices. So today, maybe take a moment. Think of someone you once misunderstood, someone you may have judged too quickly, or maybe think of the times you were the one being looked down on, and remember how you kept your head held high, because that's what this story really is, a call to walk gently but firmly, to speak softly but truthfully, and to never forget that the greatest wealth we carry is not in a portfolio, but in the way we value ourselves, even when others do not. If this story touched something in you, consider passing it along to someone who might be needing a little reminder today. A quiet story, told simply, can travel far. And perhaps, in the end, that's how justice really works. Not by force, but by truth wrapped in grace, carried forward one heart at a time.